Manamane, Nadlu Tampendi, Kaurna Mayuna, Yura Matanya Wamatala Nyako. Kaurna Mayunako Yotako, Taikaringa Tawila, Panako Tapapuruna, Buncho Yachakuma, Nadlu, Panadu Wadu Tulatina, Mankoriagu, Nadlu Tampendi, Ramanjeri, Naranjeri, Anangu, Adnamatna, Naranga, Mayuna Kuma Layalara, Mani Nabudni, Yaincha in Burundi, Ghana Yatanga, Bilyanina Yatanga. With respect to Ghana speakers present tonight, particularly spoken with Uncle Lewis about this, it has been my wish to be saying just now, we acknowledge the Ghana people and their spiritual relationship with the land as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region. We acknowledge their living culture, heritage and beliefs. We also acknowledge the Narangeri, the Anangu, Adnamatna, Naranga and Wurundjeri and other Aboriginal peoples here on this meeting on Kaurna land today. May we walk together in harmony in a spirit of reconciliation. Well, thank you very much, Katrina Kalapina Power, for your lovely, warm introduction today. And it's a great pleasure for me to be here at this very special Imbalende on Kaurna land. And it's very special that we have had this conference that has been going this week, looking at the Kaurna language. My PhD was in sociolinguistics, and I looked at the issue of language and identity. So it is a matter of particular passion for me, how one recognizes in our societies the languages that we have and how they are part of the very inheritance we have. And indeed, how we can have mechanisms that can improve that taking place. So this particular conference this week and this particular forum this afternoon becomes a vital part of that whole process. But I want to just say a few words about what is the state of play of languages in our world today and a subset of what is actually happening here within Australia. There is a publication called Ethnologue, which seeks to catalogue the languages of the world. Of course, this is always going to be something of an inexact science, but it gives us some indication of some very important facts. The edition of Ethnologue in 2010, which was the UN International Year for Languages, identified 6,912 living languages around the globe. And it said that for those languages, the average, the mean number of speakers for each language was about 800,000, and the median was 7,000. In other words, half of all the languages had 7,000 speakers or less. Putting these figures another way, it found that 8 languages spoken in the world today have more than 100 million speakers. 75 had between 10 and 99 million, 264 had between 1 and 9.99 million. But at the other end, 204 languages had between 1 and 9 speakers, 344 between 10 and 99, 1,071 between 100 and 999, and 1967 between 1,000 and 9,999. Now, of course, I repeat, this is an inexact science, so sometimes these figures seem a bit over-specific. But the issue that really stood out for me out of all this was, of those languages spoken by Ethnologue's assessment by less than 9 people, or by less than 99 people, was the situation applying to Australia. Australia was identified in that report as having 231 Aboriginal languages that were being spoken in this country. It identified of those, 11 of them, were spoken by between 1 and 10,000 people. 40 were spoken by between 100 and 999 people, while 80 were spoken between 10 and 99 people. And the greatest individual group of Australian Aboriginal languages were 92 that were spoken by less than 10 people. Now let me put this another way. Before you say how bad that figure is, I wish you to consider how bad it really is. For 92 of our languages, according to Ethnologue's assessment, to be spoken by less than 10 people, that means that 45% of all the languages in the world that are spoken by less than 9 people are here in Australia. Sadly, the most significant factor that might make the figure genuinely overstated is the fact that many of the entries in Ethnologue, though it was published in 2010, come from figures of the 1990s and the early part of this century, and so may already be out of date in the wrong way. So I make these points by simply saying that if we genuinely believe in the importance of language as part of identity, then it is critical that we take Australia's very poor ranking in those global stakes seriously, and our national and state and other avenues of community involvement, be they government, should be responding to that. Now, when I did my thesis, I looked at a number of issues, and one of the things I came down to say is that there is an interaction between the top level of community, and I don't mean top in the status level, but simply the fact that government is seen as being at the top, community at the bottom. Maybe it should be the other way around. But whatever the case, we have community, we have middle level community organisations and government organisations, and we have federal and state governments. It needs to be an interaction between the two, and unless there is to be a vibrancy within community about the need for our languages to be maintained, then they will not be maintained. The phrase that languages die out is not correct. Languages don't die, they just stop being spoken. And so the potential speakers of a language have to be part of the resolution of this issue. So it's a case of balancing together language vitality and language status. Government gives the status in terms of laws, in terms of the domains in which languages can be legally used. You know, is it possible, for example, for Kaurna to be spoken in our state and federal parliaments? Well, I suspect it isn't. And yet these are the sorts of things that status have to do with. Is it possible, for example, for languages to be used as evidence in courts? These are all the status type questions that it's up for governments to be responding. But the vitality area is also a critical area that needs to be examined. And one of the things I looked at in my thesis was the areas of what's called domains and genres of usage. And I charted this out with respect to a language of Spain, and I don't expect you to be able to read this chart, other than to say that up in this top corner you had family, friends, locality, school, and then moving along here through to the wider community area, including regional and national. Down here you had the domains, the genres of usage rather, so between people, about place, icons, proverbs, stories, song, poetry, theatre, right further down to internet, TV, radio, press, and all those sorts of things. And what I found with respect to the language I was dealing with in my thesis was that this language had a lot of usage up here, no or little usage in that area. And yet the reality is that if a language is to have vitality, if it does need its speakers speaking it, they need to feel they can use it down here as much as up here. And so the question then comes, how do we see that happening? And I believe that's a critical question with respect to the Kaurna language and other Aboriginal languages in our country. That we need to examine ways in which we take it beyond what may be its current areas of usage. And so things like toponymy, naming of places, becomes an important part of that, because that helps start feeding it into the background of our thinking, that we no longer just think of Adelaide, we start thinking of Taranyanga, and we start to think of other names becoming naturally the names we automatically start using. And in that context, it also needs to be that the usage is not just amongst those who might have regarded the Kaurna language as their own personal inheritance. It has to become something that is a shared inheritance of all of us in this community. I lived in New Zealand when I was younger, but I did some primary schooling there, and when I did some primary schooling there, while we had Māori students at the school I went to, there was absolutely no exposure to Māori tanga, te Māori, well, to Māori tanga, the cultural practices there was, but to Māori, the language, there was no exposure whatsoever. I've been back many times over the years, and one of the great things I find now when I go to New Zealand is the way in which Te Māori has been expanded in its domains of usage, the way it's been expanded in its genres of usage, and the way it's been picked up by those who actually don't have any blood inheritance of Māori, but they regard it as a shared inheritance. And so I've been at conferences where the statutory first sentences are being said in Te Māori by everybody. And it's not just the Ik bin ein Berliner one sort of sentence. There are actually more sophisticated usages taking place amongst first language Te Māori speakers and second language Te Māori speakers, mainly Pākehā speakers in that country. And to have been at conferences where there has been a genuine observation of the sharedness of this was, for me, a tremendous journey that that country has made over that period of time from my childhood through to what's happening now, which tells me about the potential for that to happen in this situation too. Now, a number of important things need to happen, and I really thank you, Katrina, for your comments, your kind comments to me today, and for Alicia Rigney to be here is just a very special privilege for me. When I'm asked about what I am proud of in my time in politics, I can tell you that the Kaurna Plains School and my participation as one of the players in that, and that's all I was one of the players in that, is something about which I will never forget. It stands up there at the top of my list of things I believe I was able to play a part in this community. And why would that be so? Because suddenly it gave a focus, an educational focus in our community. Of course, we had things going on in other levels of education, but it was critical that it happen at the primary and then secondary levels of our education. Because if we're going to have a strengthening of the language, it needs to be done like that. So they're the sorts of things that should happen. But it does need to go wider than that. And I would hope that we would see in our wider school communities exposure to all young people to the language inheritance of the communities of our country. And in this case, that means Kaurna in some parts of South Australia. Of course, that will mean other languages, Nalangeri or Pitjantjatjara, Yakanatjara, Matna, and the like. And so that the building up of resource materials becomes important in that whole process. So it's with those contexts in mind that I want to commend Rob, you and all the organisers of this conference, and believe that this is the kind of thing that I think years from now we can look back on as being a significant milestone in how the language can further develop in our community. That it was in 2014 that the next leap forward took place, and then maybe in 10 years from now we can see a wide take-up of Kaurna in different ways, its domains of usage, its genres of usage having been expanded, and its speakers, who are the core of the language living, being not just those for whom Kaurna had been a language of their own direct blood inheritance, but recognised by all of us, that any of us who live here in the Adelaide Plains, it is actually part of our inheritance too. So with those comments, ladies and gentlemen, I'm particularly pleased and honoured to have been invited here today to open this forum. And now